It was when I was in Turkey. And it was when I was in Blue Mosque, Sultan Ahmed, I think you guys call it. That's when I started really seeing into religion for the first time. I'd experienced other religions, but not to the depth that I experienced Islam. Other religions, I just kind of read about them, but Islam I experienced through feeling. From being inside the mosque, from hearing the azan, it was completely different.
What was your view of Islam back then? Did you have any prejudices?
I had lots of prejudices, but they were subconscious. I never thought of myself as an Islamophobe. I never thought I didn't like a group of people. I was always trying to be kind. I was trying to be a good person. But yeah, I did have prejudices. When I first came to Turkey, I remember my granny said to me, please don't go to a Muslim country. Please, just don't go. She thought something was going to happen to me. And when she told me, don't go, it's a Muslim country, I was like, honestly, I got scared. I definitely did have that notion. When I first visited a mosque in Turkey, I thought the people were going to tell me I can't go in. I thought that they were going to, laugh at me. They were going to stare at me in a negative way. I expected the worst when I went into a mosque for the first time.
Have you ever experienced something?
I always had a bad relationship with alcohol. So when I was 8 years old, my brother died from alcohol. And the reason why it affected me so much is because obviously I was very close to him. He was my brother. But the reason why it affected me so much is because when he died, the doctor said that if he wasn't drunk, he wouldn't have died. He got drunk, he got in a fight. One punch it took, one punch, and he hit the floor, the brain hit the back of his head and he died. As soon as he hit the floor, he was dead. It was instant. But the doctor said if he wasn't drunk, he would have tensed for that punch and he wouldn't have died. That was the reason. So if he hadn't been drinking, he wouldn't have died. So I always had a problem with alcohol. And after his death, I was very young, but my family, they didn't understand the negative impacts of alcohol. They actually carried on drinking. They drank more than they used to. My dad went to pubs even more. I saw him even less. He was always at the pub. And through him going to the pub, my dad then met a 15-year-old girl who he left my mum for. He ran away with a 15-year-old girl and he left his entire family behind because of alcohol. And this is something that I always advocated for when I grew up. Because my entire family split in half over the course of a year. This all happened in a year. It was me, my dad, my brother, and mum. And then that was it. Half was gone. I never saw my dad again. Half was gone. It was me and my mum. And I think what happened after this incident is I grew up hating alcohol. I hated parties. I couldn't attend parties. I felt really bad. But as I started getting older, probably around 20, I started thinking, oh, maybe it's not so bad. I never turned into a party freak. I never went through that. For me, it was about networking. Everyone said, if you go to these clubs, you'll meet the right people, you'll get in the right circles, you'll network. So I started doing it for that reason. There was one time when I was in LA, I went to a nightclub and somebody spiked my drink. And that same night, I ended up in hospital because somebody tried to kidnap me, pretty much. Someone tried to kidnap me while I was in LA. And after that moment, I remember waking up in the hospital. I had makeup all down my face. I was in an awful state. And I remember thinking, why did I do this to myself? Like, I've always been against alcohol. Why have I started getting in this life? But the worst part was, after that, I didn't stop. I carried on partying, not as much as my friends, a little bit here and there. And when I came to Turkey with bad intentions. I didn't have good intentions when I came here. So Like Allah really waited until I'd lost like my whole self pretty much, to the extent that I was looking for plastic surgery. Like I was actually trying to change myself. Allah waited until I lost my whole self until Allah took me to Islam.
What impressed you the most about Islam?
I mean, there wasn't one thing. There was lots of different things that happened over time. I think for me, the biggest thing that actually got me thinking about Islam seriously was when I did tasbih for the first time. So when I saw people in Turkey doing tasbih, I saw so many people doing it. I thought they were stress beads. That's what I used to call them. I used to call my mum and be like, people in Turkey, they do stress beads. It's so cool, mum. So when I actually Googled for the first time what you're supposed to say when you do it, and I learned about Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, and I learned the meaning of these words, and I started doing it for the first time, there was another moment on top of that that was really special. And that was a moment that happened after I did tasbih for the first time. And that was a moment when I was coming out of the mosque, Blue Mosque here in Istanbul. And I stood between Blue Mosque and Hagia Sophia. That's where I heard the azan for the first time. I mean, I'd heard it before, but this is when I really heard it. Like I actually stopped and listened to the azan. Because when you're standing between those two mosques, it's so loud. The azan is so loud. And I remember standing there and just hearing the azan and thinking, wow, that is so beautiful. That is so peaceful. And I remember in that moment, I had an hour journey back to my hostel. I had to walk an hour back to my hostel. I didn't know the way. I was thinking to myself, okay, I need to go back to my hostel. How do I get there? So I got my phone out. I was ready to Google Maps. And then my phone that was on 50% battery just died. And I remember feeling really anxious. I was thinking, how am I going to get back to my hostel? I'm in a foreign country. I don't know where to go. And I was panicking and the azan was still playing. And then all of a sudden, it was like all my worries just dropped. Like it was like everything just disappeared and my anxiety left my body. And I thought, God, if you're real, this is kind of what's going through my mind. Like, God, if you're real, help me get back to my hostel. And in that moment, in a very, 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 very long time, I wasn't anxious. I wasn't worried. Like before I became Muslim, I think I spent a lot of my time being worried. Like everything worried me. Like I had such bad anxiety. Like what if I go in the street and this thing happens? What if I do this and this happens? And then once I discovered Islam, once I became Muslim, it was the remedy to my anxiety. It was the thing that I'd been searching for so long to stop me from feeling anxious all the time and worried all the time, because I learned tawakkul. I learned about having faith in God, about having faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That feeling was what actually drew me to Islam.
How did you find your hostel?
Subhanallah, I just walked straight to my hostel. I didn't take a single wrong turn. I don't know how I did it. It was all by the grace of Allah. But I walked from Blue Mosque straight to my hostel with no intervention, no help. Nobody helped me. And I was calm the entire time. There was not one moment where I thought, I've taken a wrong turn, I don't know where to go. SubhanAllah, it wasn't me, it was Allah that got me back to my hostel.
What happened between those two moments, that hearing the adhan for the first time, taking the shahada?
My first experience inside Blue Mosque. After that, I went back to the hostel and I started reading the Quran. There was an English translation inside my hostel. So I picked that up and I started reading. And I read probably around 5 pages of Surah Baqarah. I was just reading, being about Allah, because during Ramadan, I was just like focused. I was fasting, I was praying. And between that, I was just learning about Islam. That was all I was doing with my time. So the way Islam made me feel, I was like, this is the truth. Nothing in my life has given me this feeling. And because of that feeling, that's when I started taking it seriously. And I started going, this is from God, because only God can give me that contentment. I've tried so many things in my life to find contentment, to find happiness. And God has given me that with Islam.
How did you feel when you took Shahada? Could you please describe that moment in detail for us?
I didn't take Shahada in a formal way. I didn't do it in a mosque. I did it during COVID, during lockdown, in my living room. I cried the entire night. It was during Ramadan, the Ramadan that I became Muslim. I cried pretty much the whole time. If I remember rightly, I did it over and over again because I was worried that I was doing it wrong. So I kept doing the Shahada over and over again because I couldn't get the words out, and I was crying so much, and I was like, okay, I'd take a breath and then I'd try again, then I'd start crying. So I did my Shahada technically multiple times. The feeling was like, it was like I'd found my purpose. It was like my whole life I've always been bouncing between things. I spent my whole life bouncing. I never completed anything. I would start a course at school, I wouldn't finish it. I would start a job, I would quit. My whole life I was just bouncing around. And because I never knew my purpose, I didn't know where I was going, I didn't know why I was here. I was just constantly confused, and that's how I felt for a long time. And I knew in that moment when I took my Shahada, I knew that that was it. I could leave that kind of bouncing behind. That when you're a non-Muslim, you have nothing to focus on. Everything's really difficult. Everything's a burden because you don't know why it's happening. You're confused. Where am I going? Why am I here? Why is this happening? Why am I doing this? You just don't know. But then all of a sudden we're given these set of morals, we're given guidelines to follow, and then the goal becomes clearer. You know where you're going, why you're going there, what you're going to get at the end of it, and that's Jannah, inshallah. And that goal towards Jannah is such an easier life to live than a life of not knowing where you're going. So yeah, it was a very emotional time for me.